The dragon prince couldn't breathe fire until the human janitor taught him to whistle. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. In the grand halls of Mount Draconis, where ancient stone met enchanted crystal, a young dragon prince named Varric struggled with a secret shame. While other dragons his age proudly demonstrated their growing flame capabilities, Varric's throat produced nothing but puffs of lukewarm smoke. The royal palace of Mount Draconis stood as the crown jewel of dragon civilization, carved into the heart of the tallest mountain on the continent. Its sprawling chambers were designed to accommodate dragons of all sizes, from the newly hatched to the ancient elders whose wings spanned the length of ballrooms. Enchanted crystals embedded in the high ceilings cast a warm, amber glow throughout the palace, eliminating the need for torches that would seem pitiful to a race of fire-breathers. Prince Varric, son of Queen Azura and heir to the throne, paced anxiously in his private chambers. His scales, a deep sapphire blue that would eventually mature to the royal midnight hue of the ruling line, caught the light as he moved. At 16 years old, he was in the awkward stage of dragon adolescence, too large to be considered a hatchling, but lacking the imposing presence of an adult. His wings, still growing into their full span, dragged slightly on the polished stone floor as he turned. "Useless," he muttered, sending another pathetic wisp of smoke from his nostrils. Absolutely useless. Tomorrow was the flame ceremony, a tradition dating back thousands of years, where young dragons of noble birth demonstrated their flame-breathing capabilities before the court. It was meant to be a celebration, a rite of passage, but for Varric, it loomed like a death sentence. How could the future king rule if he couldn't even produce a proper flame? The doors to his chamber swung open, and Varric quickly composed himself, straightening his posture and lifting his chin. A small, hunched figure entered, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. "Evening, Your Highness," said the human, offering a respectful bow that made his mop of sandy brown hair flop forward. "Just here for the evening clean." Ethan Cole had been working as a janitor in the Dragon Palace for nearly 3 years. After the Great Alliance between dragons and humans 50 years ago, it had become somewhat common for humans to work in service positions within dragon territories. The arrangement benefited both species. Dragons gained access to human ingenuity and their ability to navigate smaller spaces, while humans received protection and knowledge from their powerful allies. Varric watched the human work with mild interest. The janitor was in his late 30s, with laugh lines around his eyes and a perpetual stubble that never seemed to grow into a full beard. There was something soothing about the methodical way he moved around the room, dusting surfaces and polishing the precious metals that decorated the chamber. "You seem troubled tonight, Your Highness," Ethan remarked, carefully wiping down a collection of ancient scrolls without disturbing their arrangement. "If you don't mind me saying so." Varric snorted, a small puff of smoke escaping his nostrils. "Is it that obvious?" "Well," Ethan said with a gentle smile, "you've worn a groove into the floor with your pacing, and that's the 5th tapestry you've singed with your tail today." The dragon prince turned in alarm to see that he had indeed burned a small hole in an ancestral tapestry depicting his great-grandfather's victory in the Battle of Scorched Valley. He groaned. "Don't worry," Ethan said, pulling a small sewing kit from his cart. "I can mend it." The benefits of having small hands. He wiggled his fingers demonstratively. Varric sank onto his sleeping platform, a depression in the floor lined with precious metals and gems. Dragons preferred to sleep on hard surfaces that could accommodate their natural body heat without catching fire. "It's the flame ceremony tomorrow," the prince admitted. "And I can't." "Can't what, Your Highness?" "I can't breathe fire," Varric said in a rush, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider confessing his greatest shame to a human janitor. "Not properly. Just smoke and sparks. Nothing like what a prince should produce." To Varric's surprise, Ethan didn't laugh or look shocked. He simply nodded thoughtfully as he threaded a needle with fireproof silk. "I see. And this ceremony is important, I take it." Important? It's only the most significant milestone in a young dragon's life, Varric said, his tail thumping against the floor in agitation. It's when we demonstrate that we're maturing properly, that we're worthy of our lineage. My mother, the queen, she produced a flame so hot it melted the ceremonial brazier. My father's flame could be seen from 3 kingdoms away. And he released another pathetic wisp of smoke. Ethan worked in silence for a moment, his nimble fingers repairing the damage to the tapestry. Have you seen the dragon healers about this? Of course, Varric said, somewhat offended by the question. They say there's nothing physically wrong with me. My fire sac is developed, my ignition glands are functional. It's just, he trailed off, unable to articulate the problem. A mental block, perhaps? Ethan suggested, finishing his repair and moving to polish a collection of jeweled ceremonial armor. Varric hadn't considered that. Dragons were proud creatures, not given to introspection about psychological matters. What do you mean? Well, Ethan said carefully, when I was a boy, I had trouble learning to swim. My body knew what to do. My father was a fisherman, and I'd watched him swim 1,000 times. But whenever I got in the water, I'd freeze up. Turned out I was overthinking it, trying too hard to control every movement instead of letting my body do what came naturally. The Dragon Prince considered this. How did you overcome it? My grandfather taught me to whistle, Ethan said with a smile, setting down his polishing cloth. Whistle? What does that have to do with swimming? Nothing directly, Ethan admitted. But learning to whistle taught me something about how to position my mouth, how to control my breath, how to relax certain muscles while tensing others. And more importantly, it gave me something else to focus on besides my fear. Varric leaned forward, intrigued despite his skepticism. And you think whistling could help me breathe fire? I don't know, Ethan said honestly. Dragon physiology is different from human, obviously, but the principles might be similar. Fire breathing requires control of breath, muscle coordination, and the right mental state, doesn't it? The prince nodded slowly. It was true that fire breathing was a complex physiological process, requiring precise control over multiple bodily systems. Perhaps there was something to what the human was saying. Could you show me how to whistle? Varric asked, feeling somewhat ridiculous. The future king of dragons, asking a human janitor for lessons in an irrelevant human skill. Ethan smiled warmly. I'd be honored, Your Highness. But perhaps we should find a more private location? If you're concerned about others knowing about your situation. Varric glanced at the doors to his chamber, which were guarded at all times. If word got out that he was taking lessons from a human janitor on the eve of his flame ceremony, the court gossip would be merciless. There's a disused storeroom 3 levels down, the prince said after a moment's thought. It used to hold battle trophies before they were moved to the new wing. No one goes there anymore. Perfect, Ethan said, gathering his cleaning supplies. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes, after I finish my rounds on this floor. 20 minutes later, Varric slipped into the abandoned storeroom, having taken a circuitous route to avoid the palace guards. The chamber was dusty and cluttered with empty display pedestals and broken weaponry too insignificant to repair, but too historically valuable to discard. Ethan arrived shortly after, carrying a small lantern that cast long shadows across the room. Your Highness, he said with a bow. We can dispense with the formalities here, Varric said, feeling strangely liberated in this forgotten corner of the palace. Call me Varric. Very well. Varric, Ethan said, setting down his lantern on a stone pedestal. Shall we begin? For the next hour, Ethan demonstrated the basics of whistling. He showed how to position the lips, how to control the flow of air, how to create different tones by adjusting the shape of the mouth and the tension of facial muscles. Varric watched intently, then attempted to replicate the movements with his much larger, differently shaped dragon mouth. The results were disastrous at first. Instead of whistling, Varric produced a series of wheezing sounds, interspersed with puffs of smoke that made Ethan cough. Sorry, the Dragon Prince said, embarrassed by his failure. No need to apologize, Ethan assured him. No one gets it right the first time. Try again, but this time, don't think about making a sound. Just focus on the feeling of the air moving through a small opening. Varric tried again and again and again. By the 10th attempt, he was growing frustrated, his tail lashing against the stone floor. "This is pointless," he growled. "My mouth isn't shaped like yours. Dragons don't whistle. Maybe not in the same way humans do," Ethan acknowledged. "But you control your breath when you speak, don't you? When you sing. It's just a matter of finding the right configuration." The human demonstrated again, producing a clear, melodic whistle that echoed slightly in the cavernous room. "Notice how I'm not forcing the air out. I'm letting it flow naturally, just directing it with my lips and tongue." Something in that explanation clicked for Varric. He had been trying to force the air out, just as he had been trying to force his fire to come. Perhaps that was part of the problem. He closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of air moving through his lungs, up his long neck, and out through his mouth. He adjusted the position of his forked tongue, curled it slightly, and allowed a gentle stream of air to flow across it. To his astonishment, a low, flute-like sound emerged from his mouth. It wasn't exactly a whistle as Ethan produced it, but it was a clear, controlled sound unlike anything he had made before. "That's it," Ethan exclaimed, his face lighting up with genuine delight. "That's the beginning. Try again, but maintain that same relaxed feeling in your throat." Encouraged, Varric repeated the action, producing a slightly stronger sound. He felt a strange tickling sensation in his fire sac, a warming that was different from his previous attempts to breathe fire. "I feel something," he said excitedly. "Something's happening when I make that sound." "Keep going," Ethan urged. "Try varying the pressure, just like when you change the tone of a whistle." For another hour, they experimented. Varric discovered that by changing the shape of his mouth and the position of his tongue, he could create different sounds, some high and piercing, others low and resonant. And with each success, he felt that strange warming sensation grow stronger. "I think," he said finally, pausing to catch his breath, "I think I understand what's happening. When I try to breathe fire normally, I'm tensing everything, my throat, my chest, my fire sac. I'm trying to force it out all at once." Ethan nodded. "And with whistling, I have to relax certain muscles while controlling others precisely," Varric said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "It's not about power, it's about control." "Exactly," Ethan said with a smile. "Fire needs oxygen to burn. If you're tensing up your whole respiratory system, you might be cutting off the airflow your fire needs." Varric took a deep breath, feeling a new confidence. "Let me try something." He positioned his mouth as he had when producing the flute-like whistle, but this time, he also engaged his fire sac. He felt the familiar heat building, but instead of trying to force it out in a rush, he channeled it through the same pathway he had used for whistling. A small, focused jet of blue flame shot from his mouth, striking the wall opposite and leaving a scorch mark on the ancient stone. "I did it," Varric exclaimed, nearly knocking over a pedestal in his excitement. "I breathed fire." It wasn't a massive inferno like his mother could produce, but it was real fire, controlled, directed, and undeniably hot. Ethan beamed with pride. "Excellent. Now you're getting it." They practiced for another hour, with Varric gradually gaining more control over the size and intensity of his flame. By the end of the session, he could produce a steady stream of fire for nearly 10 seconds, more than enough for the basic demonstration required at the ceremony. I don't know how to thank you," Varric said as they prepared to leave the storeroom. "You've saved me from public humiliation, possibly even saved my future as heir." Ethan waved away the thanks. "I'm just glad I could help. Besides, I've always believed that different species can learn from each other. Humans may not breathe fire, but we understand breath control from singing, whistling, playing wind instruments. Sometimes an outside perspective is exactly what's needed." As they parted ways at the door, Varric felt a genuine bond forming with this unassuming human. "Will you be at the ceremony tomorrow?" he asked. "Service staff aren't usually invited to royal ceremonies," Ethan said with a slight shrug. "Then I'll make sure you receive an invitation," Varric decided. After all, it's only right that my teacher should see the results of his instruction. The next morning, the Great Hall of Mount Draconis was filled to capacity. Dragons of all ages and colors perched on stone outcroppings or hovered near the ceiling, their wings creating gentle currents that stirred the banners hanging from the rafters. In a special section near the front, a small delegation of humans sat on specially constructed platforms, their presence a testament to the enduring alliance between the species. Among them, dressed in formal attire that was a far cry from his usual janitor's uniform, sat Ethan Cole. He had been shocked to receive the formal invitation delivered by a royal messenger at dawn, along with the ceremonial clothing and a note from Prince Varric thanking him again for his assistance. Queen Azura, a magnificent dragon with scales the color of midnight and eyes like polished amethysts, presided over the ceremony from her raised dais. Her wings, partially folded behind her massive form, occasionally stretched to their full impressive span when she shifted position, causing nearby courtiers to duck respectfully. One by one, young dragons of noble birth came forward to demonstrate their flame-breathing abilities. Some produced impressive displays, their fire dancing in complex patterns before dissipating. Others managed more modest performances but were still met with approving nods from the assembled court. Finally, the royal herald announced, His Royal Highness, Prince Varric, heir to the throne of Mount Draconis, son of the sky and flame. A hush fell over the crowd as Varric entered the ceremonial circle. His scales gleamed in the light of the enchanted crystals, and he held his head high, though Ethan could detect a slight nervousness in the way his tail curled slightly at the tip. The prince bowed formally to his mother, then turned to face the ceremonial brazier, a massive bowl of enchanted metal designed to withstand even the hottest dragon flame. Varric closed his eyes briefly, and Ethan could almost see him running through the lessons from the night before. Then, with deliberate precision, the dragon prince positioned his mouth, adjusted his breathing, and released his flame. What emerged was not the modest jet of fire they had practiced. Instead, a brilliant blue flame shot from Varric's mouth, spiraling in a controlled helix before striking the brazier with such intensity that the metal began to glow white-hot. The flame didn't stop there. It continued to build, changing color from blue to violet to a blinding white that forced many onlookers to shield their eyes. For nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in flame-breathing terms, Varric maintained the incredible display. When he finally closed his mouth, cutting off the flame, the brazier had partially melted, its enchanted metal dripping onto the stone floor below. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the great hall. Then, starting with Queen Azura herself, the assembled dragons began to roar their approval, a deafening cacophony of draconic voices that shook dust from the ancient ceiling. Ethan found himself cheering along with everyone else, filled with an unexpected pride in his royal student's achievement. After the ceremony, as the court moved to the adjoining hall for the celebratory feast, a royal guard approached Ethan. "The prince requests your presence," the guard said formally, though Ethan caught a hint of curiosity in his expression. He was led through a series of corridors to a small antechamber where Varric waited, still glowing with triumph from his performance. "Ethan," the prince exclaimed when they were alone. Did you see what happened?" "I did," Ethan said, grinning broadly. "That was, well, beyond anything we practiced." "It was the whistling," Varric said excitedly. "When I was out there, I remembered what you said about not forcing it, about finding the right configuration and letting the air flow naturally. And suddenly, I could feel this resonance between my fire sac and my breath. It was like they synchronized in a way they never had before." "That's remarkable," Ethan said sincerely. "Your flame was unlike any I've seen before, and I've attended several flame ceremonies during my time here." "The court physicians are calling it harmonic fire," Varric said, his eyes bright with excitement. "They say it's an extremely rare variation that hasn't been seen in the royal lineage for 7 generations. Apparently, it requires a perfect balance between breath control and fire production. Exactly what you taught me with the whistling." Before Ethan could respond, the doors to the antechamber opened, and Queen Azura herself entered. Even with her head lowered to fit through the doorway, She was an imposing presence, radiating power and ancient wisdom. Ethan immediately dropped to one knee, bowing his head deeply. "Your Majesty." "Rise, Ethan Cole," the Queen said, her voice like distant thunder. "My son has been telling me about your unusual teaching methods." Ethan rose slowly, unable to read the Dragon Queen's expression. Had he overstepped by instructing the prince? Was it inappropriate for a human janitor to have taught a dragon prince anything at all? "I hope I haven't caused any offense, Your Majesty," he said carefully. "Offense?" Queen Azura's massive head tilted slightly. "You have helped my son discover a rare and powerful gift. A gift that many believed had been lost to our bloodline forever." She turned to Varric. "Harmonic fire is more than just an impressive display, my son. It is precise enough for the most delicate work, yet powerful enough to melt enchanted metals. In the ancient times, those with this gift were not just warriors but artisans, healers, and makers of magical artifacts." Varric's eyes widened. "I had no idea." "How could you?" the Queen said, a gentle rumble in her throat that Ethan realized was the dragon equivalent of a chuckle. "The knowledge has been preserved in our oldest scrolls, but few have reason to study such ancient history when the gift itself has been absent for so long." She turned back to Ethan. "It seems we owe you a debt of gratitude, Ethan Cole. You have given the royal line a gift that no dragon could have provided." Ethan felt his face flush with the unexpected praise. "I only showed him how to whistle, Your Majesty. The prince did the real work himself." "Sometimes," Queen Azura said thoughtfully, "the simplest lessons yield the most profound results, particularly when they come from unexpected sources." She straightened to her full height, her horns nearly brushing the ceiling. "I believe your talents are wasted in your current position. Henceforth, you shall be appointed as royal human liaison to the court of Mount Draconis, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails." Ethan's mouth fell open in shock. The position of human liaison was a prestigious diplomatic role, typically reserved for high-ranking human officials or scholars with decades of experience in draconic relations. "Your Majesty, I don't know what to say," he stammered. "I'm just a janitor. I have no training in diplomacy or court protocol." "Yet you managed to teach a dragon prince a skill no dragon could teach him," the Queen pointed out. "And in doing so, you demonstrated the very essence of what the alliance between our species should be, an exchange of unique perspectives and abilities that benefit both sides." Varric stepped forward. "Mother, if I may, Ethan has a natural gift for teaching. Perhaps his role could include instruction as well? Many young dragons struggle with flame control, and clearly, his methods have merit." Queen Azura considered this for a moment, then nodded her massive head. "An excellent suggestion. Ethan Cole, you shall also serve as special instructor in human techniques for draconic arts. You will teach young dragons how human approaches to breath control, focus, and creativity might enhance their natural abilities." Ethan's mind reeled at the sudden change in his fortunes. From janitor to royal instructor and diplomat in the span of a day. It seemed impossible, yet the Queen's tone brooked no argument. "I am deeply honored, Your Majesty," he said, bowing again. "I will do my best to serve the court and strengthen the bonds between our peoples." "See that you do," the Queen said, though there was warmth in her ancient eyes. "Now, I believe we have a feast to attend, and I suspect many young dragons, and their parents, will be most eager to meet the human who taught the prince to whistle, and in doing so, awakened a legendary fire." As they made their way to the grand feast hall, Varric walked alongside Ethan, his massive form carefully navigating the corridor to avoid crushing his human companion. "Thank you," the prince said quietly, "not just for the lesson, but for believing I could do it when even I had lost faith." "Sometimes," Ethan replied with a smile, "all anyone needs is for someone to look at their problem from a different angle. Dragons and humans see the world differently, and that's not a weakness, but a strength we can share." Varric nodded thoughtfully. "I think that may be the most important lesson of all." As they entered the feast hall to thunderous applause, Ethan reflected that this unexpected friendship with a dragon prince had changed both their lives forever, all because of a simple human skill as humble and ordinary as whistling. In the heart of Mount Draconis, a new chapter in dragon-human relations had begun, built on the understanding that sometimes the greatest magic comes from the most unexpected sources, and that wisdom can be found in the crossing of paths between the magnificent and the mundane. The feast that followed the flame ceremony was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced in his 3 years at Mount Draconis. In the past, he had only glimpsed such grand events from the shadows while performing his cleaning duties. Now, he sat at a table of honor, surrounded by curious dragons and the small human delegation that seemed equally surprised by his sudden elevation. "So you taught the prince to whistle?" asked an elderly human diplomat, her silver hair elaborately styled in the fashion favored by those who frequently interacted with draconic nobility. "And that somehow led to this harmonic fire?" "It wasn't quite that simple," Ethan explained, still somewhat uncomfortable with his newfound attention. "It was more about helping him understand breath control from a different perspective. The feast hall was a magnificent space, with ceilings that soared hundreds of feet high to accommodate flying dragons who preferred to perch rather than sit. The tables for dragons were raised stone platforms covered with precious metals that could withstand their heat, while human guests were seated at specially designed tables nearby, close enough for conversation, but safely away from the occasional wayward flame or tail. From his position, Ethan could see Prince Varric holding court among dragons his own age, demonstrating small, controlled bursts of his new harmonic fire to their evident amazement. The blue-white flame danced and spiraled in patterns that seemed almost musical in their rhythm. Queen Azura watched from her royal dais, her massive form draped in ceremonial gold chains and jewels that caught the light with every movement. Though her expression remained regal and composed, Ethan thought he detected a softness in her gaze when she looked at her son. As the feast progressed, young dragons approached Ethan one after another, each eager to learn if his human techniques might help them improve their own flame control. By the end of the evening, he had promised lessons to no fewer than 12 young nobles, with more hovering nearby, too shy or proud to ask directly. "You've become quite popular," Varric said, approaching Ethan's table as the feast began to wind down. The prince lowered his head to speak more privately. "I hope you don't mind. Word of your methods has spread quickly." "I don't mind at all," Ethan replied, genuinely touched by the interest. "Though I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach so many. What if the whistling technique only worked for you because of your specific condition?" Varric considered this. "Perhaps, but I think there's more to it. Dragons have always believed fire breathing to be purely instinctual, something that comes naturally with maturity. The idea that it could be refined through conscious technique is revolutionary." Before they could discuss further, a commotion near the entrance to the feast hall caught everyone's attention. The massive doors swung open to admit a delegation of dragons unlike any Ethan had seen before. Their scales were a burnished copper color, and they wore elaborate harnesses decorated with unfamiliar symbols. "Mountain dragons," Varric whispered, his posture stiffening. "From the eastern ranges. They rarely leave their territory." The lead dragon, a massive male with a jagged scar running down one side of his face, approached Queen Azura's dais and bowed his head respectfully. "Queen Azura," he rumbled, his voice carrying throughout the suddenly quiet hall. "I am Drogath, War Chief of the Eastern Ranges. We come seeking aid." The queen inclined her head slightly. "Speak, War Chief Drogath. What brings you so far from your mountains?" "The Void Serpents have returned," Drogath said gravely, causing a wave of murmurs and gasps throughout the hall. "3 villages in our outer territories have already fallen. Our flame cannot harm them." Ethan leaned toward Varric. "Void serpents," he whispered. The prince's expression was grim. "Ancient enemies of dragonkind. They come from the spaces between realities, creatures of shadow and cold. They feed on heat and light, which makes our usual defenses useless against them. Traditional dragon flame only makes them stronger." Queen Azura rose to her full height, her wings extending slightly in concern. This is grave news indeed. How many serpents have you encountered? A clutch of 8, led by a void matriarch, Drogath replied. The largest incursion in 5 centuries. And you are certain your flames had no effect? The queen pressed. We lost 3 of our strongest warriors attempting to burn them, Drogath said, his voice heavy with grief. Their flames were simply absorbed. The serpents grew larger, stronger. The hall erupted in anxious conversation. Ethan noticed that even the human diplomats looked deeply concerned, though few seemed to fully understand the threat. Queen Azura raised a wing for silence. War Chief Drogath, we will aid you in this fight. Mount Draconis stands with our eastern kin. She turned to her advisors. Summon the Mage Council. We must consult the ancient texts for methods to combat the void serpents. As the feast dissolved into urgent planning, Varric drew Ethan aside, leading him to a quiet alcove off the main hall. This is bad, the prince said quietly. Very bad. Void serpents are among the few creatures that dragons truly fear. They're immune to our greatest weapon. But surely there must be other ways to fight them? Ethan asked. Physical attacks? Magic? Varric shook his head. Their bodies are semi-corporeal. Physical weapons pass right through unless they're enchanted with specific counter-magic. And most offensive magic involves fire or energy manipulation, which only feeds them. Ethan frowned, thinking, if they feed on heat and energy, could they be vulnerable to cold? To absence of energy? The ancient texts mention cold iron weapons having some effect, Varric acknowledged. But forging weapons large enough for dragons to wield effectively is challenging, and getting close enough to use them is extremely dangerous. The void serpents can lash out with tendrils of absolute cold that freeze a dragon's wings mid-flight. They were interrupted by a royal messenger who approached with a bow. Prince Varric, the queen requests your presence in the war chamber. And the messenger hesitated, looking at Ethan with uncertainty. The human instructor as well. Exchanging puzzled glances, Varric and Ethan followed the messenger through the winding corridors of the palace to a section Ethan had never visited before. The war chamber was a circular room deep within the mountain, its walls lined with maps and ancient weapons. A massive table of polished obsidian dominated the center, around which Queen Azura and her advisors were already gathered, along with Drogath and his warriors. Varric, Ethan, the queen acknowledged their arrival. We were just discussing potential strategies against the void serpents. Forgive me, your majesty, one of the elder advisors said with obvious disapproval. But is it wise to include a human in such sensitive discussions? Particularly one who until yesterday was merely a janitor. Queen Azura fixed the advisor with a stern gaze. Ethan Cole has already demonstrated that human perspective can provide solutions where draconic wisdom falls short. I would hear his thoughts. Encouraged by the queen's support, Ethan stepped forward to examine the map on the table, which showed the eastern ranges and the territories already claimed by the void serpents. These creatures feed on heat and energy, he said thoughtfully. What if that could be used against them? Like overfeeding a predator until it becomes sluggish. Drogath snorted dismissively. We've already established that our flame only strengthens them. Yes, but... Ethan struggled to articulate his half-formed idea. Prince Varric's harmonic fire is different from traditional dragon flame. It operates on principles of resonance rather than pure heat. All eyes turned to Varric, who looked startled at suddenly being the center of attention. Is this true? Drogath demanded. Yes, Varric admitted. I can demonstrate. He moved to an open area of the chamber and performed the whistling technique Ethan had taught him, producing a controlled spiral of blue-white flame that seemed to shimmer with internal harmonics. Drogath and his warriors watched with unconcealed amazement. I have never seen flame behave thus, the war chief admitted. Queen Azura turned to the Mage Council representative, an ancient female dragon with scales that had faded to pale silver with age. Sage Lysandra, could such flame affect the void serpents differently? The sage studied Varric's demonstration with narrowed eyes. Perhaps, The ancient texts speak of the first dragons using singing flame to seal the original void breaches. I had always assumed it was metaphorical, but this could be what they meant. Singing flame, Ethan repeated, excitement building. That fits perfectly with how we discovered it, through whistling, which is a form of musical production. But would one young dragon's flame, however unusual, be enough against a clutch of void serpents and their matriarch? Drogath asked skeptically. No, Queen Azura agreed. But if others could learn this technique. She looked to Ethan. I can teach them, he said with more confidence than he felt. At least, I can try. It took Prince Varric only hours to grasp the basics. Then it is decided, the Queen declared. Ethan will begin training selected fire breathers immediately. Varric, you will assist him and continue developing your own harmonic fire. Sage Lysandra, consult the ancient texts for any additional information on singing flame and its applications against void creatures. As the meeting dispersed, Varric pulled Ethan aside once more. Are you certain about this? Teaching a few young nobles as a curiosity is one thing, but training warriors for battle. I'm not certain at all, Ethan admitted. But it's the only advantage we have, isn't it? And if there's even a chance it could work. Varric nodded solemnly. Then we'd better get started. The next few days passed in a blur of intensive training sessions. Queen Azura had assigned a large cavern for their use, and Ethan found himself instructing not only Drogath's warriors, but also Mount Draconis's elite guards. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, as dragon after dragon attempted to master the whistling technique that would allow them to produce harmonic fire. Some took to it quickly, producing weak but distinct harmonic flames within hours. Others struggled, their traditional fire-breathing habits too deeply ingrained to easily modify. Varric worked alongside Ethan, demonstrating and encouraging, his own control growing more impressive with each passing day. The key, Ethan explained repeatedly, is to stop thinking of fire as something you force out. Instead, imagine it as music you're conducting, a harmony between your breath and your fire sac. By the fourth day, they had successfully trained 15 dragons to produce reliable harmonic fire, with another dozen showing promising progress. Drogath, despite his initial skepticism, had thrown himself into the training with fierce determination and was now capable of producing short bursts of the resonant flame. It feels strange, the war chief admitted during a break. All my life, I was taught that fire comes from strength, from power. This technique requires softness. Not softness, Ethan corrected gently. Precision. Control. Like a master swordsman who doesn't need brute force because his blade always finds the perfect spot. Drogath considered this, then nodded grudgingly. A warrior's perspective. I can respect that. Their training was interrupted by the arrival of Sage Lysandra, moving slowly but with purpose, an ancient scroll floating beside her, suspended by magic. I have found something, she announced. In the first song, the oldest written record of dragonkind. The training session halted as all gathered around the ancient sage. She carefully unrolled the scroll, revealing text in a draconic script so old that even Varric struggled to decipher it. Here, Lysandra indicated a passage with a delicate claw. It speaks of the first dragons confronting the void breach. They sang with flame and burned with song, creating patterns that the void could not consume, for harmony cannot be devoured by chaos. That confirms our approach, Varric said excitedly. The harmonic fire isn't just different. It's specifically effective against void creatures. There's more, Lysandra continued. It describes how multiple dragons singing different harmonies created a weave of flame that sealed the tear between worlds. Ethan's mind raced with the implications. Like a chord structure in music. Different notes that complement each other to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Could we do that? Drogath asked. Create this flame weave. Theoretically, Ethan said slowly. If we assign different dragons to produce different tones in their whistling, it should create different frequencies in the harmonic fire. If those frequencies are coordinated properly, a symphony of flame, Varric finished the thought. precisely what the first dragons described. Before they could discuss further, a young messenger burst into the cavern, his scales still dull with youth, his expression panicked. "The Void Serpents," he gasped. "They've crossed the border into our territory. They'll reach the outer settlements by nightfall." Drogath immediately straightened, all traces of fatigue vanishing. "We must move now, ready or not. We will meet them before they claim more innocent lives." Queen Azura, informed of the development, made a swift decision. "Assemble all who have mastered the harmonic fire. We strike at dusk." As the trained dragons prepared for battle, Ethan found himself whisked into the preparations as well. To his surprise, he was presented with a set of enchanted armor sized for a human, with straps clearly designed to secure him to a dragon's back. "You're coming with us," Varric informed him, "as our instructor and coordinator. No one understands the principles of harmonic fire better than you do." "Me? In battle?" Ethan's voice rose with alarm. "I'm not a warrior." "Neither am I, traditionally speaking," Varric said. "But these are extraordinary circumstances. You won't be fighting directly, but we need you to coordinate the harmonic patterns. Think of it as conducting an orchestra of fire-breathing dragons." Put that way, it sounded both terrifying and strangely appealing. Ethan had never considered himself brave or adventurous. He'd become a janitor because it was steady, reliable work. Yet here he was, about to fly into battle against interdimensional serpents. "All right," he agreed, swallowing his fear. "I'll do it." The armor, despite its elaborate appearance, fit surprisingly well. It was lightweight, yet felt extraordinarily sturdy, with runes of protection etched into every plate. A communication crystal hung from a chain around his neck, tuned to resonate with similar crystals worn by the dragon fighters. As the sun began to set, the strike force assembled on the great launching platform at the peak of Mount Draconis. 27 dragons in total, 15 fully trained in harmonic fire, including Varric and Drogath, plus 12 more who would provide support and protection. Queen Azura addressed them briefly. "You fly to defend not just the eastern ranges, but all dragonkind. The Void Serpents must be driven back before their incursion grows too large to contain. Fight with courage, with wisdom, and with the new flame that bridges our ancient past to our present innovation." She turned to Ethan, who felt very small indeed before her massive presence. "And you, Ethan Cole, once a humble janitor, now a teacher of dragons, lead them well in this harmonic battle." With that blessing, they took flight. Ethan was secured to Varric's back, the harness keeping him firmly in place while still allowing him freedom to move his arms to signal the other dragons. As they soared into the darkening sky, he felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration unlike anything he had ever experienced. They flew for nearly an hour, passing over the familiar territories of Mount Draconis into the more rugged landscape of the border regions. Ethan had never seen the world from such a height, and despite the grim circumstances, he couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the sunset painting the mountains in gold and crimson. Then, on the horizon, he saw it, a spreading stain of absolute darkness, as if a piece of the night sky had fallen to earth. Within that darkness, shapes moved, sinuous, massive shapes that seemed to bend and distort the very air around them. "The Void Serpents," Varric confirmed, following Ethan's gaze. "And there, the larger mass in the center, that's the matriarch." As they drew closer, Ethan could make out more details, each more horrifying than the last. The Void Serpents were enormous, each easily the size of an adult dragon, with bodies that seemed to be composed of living shadow. They undulated across the landscape, leaving trails of frost and decay in their wake. The matriarch was nearly twice the size of her offspring, with multiple heads that constantly shifted and reformed, as if unable to decide on a single shape. Drogath signaled the attack formation, and the dragons spread out in the pattern they had practiced, a modified version of traditional dragon battle tactics, adapted to maximize the effect of harmonic fire. "Remember," Ethan called through the communication crystal, "maintain your assigned tone. Don't let fear or excitement change your whistling pitch. They dove toward the void serpents, which sensed their approach and turned their amorphous heads skyward. Tendrils of absolute cold shot up from the serpents, forcing the dragons to perform evasive maneuvers. Now, Ethan shouted as they came within range. First harmonic group, 5 dragons, including Varric, released their harmonic fires simultaneously, each producing a different tone through their modified whistling technique. The flames spiraled downward in interwoven patterns, striking the nearest void serpent. Unlike normal fire, which the creatures would have simply absorbed, the harmonic flames clung to the serpent's shadowy form, creating a network of burning lines that seemed to constrain its movements. The creature writhed in obvious distress, emitting a bone-chilling sound somewhere between a hiss and a scream. "It's working!" Drogath roared triumphantly. Second harmonic group, target the next serpent. The battle quickly became chaotic, with void serpents lashing out with cold tendrils while dragons maneuvered to maintain formation and coordinate their harmonic attacks. Ethan clung to his harness, shouting instructions through the communication crystal and signaling pattern changes with his free hand. 3 of the smaller serpents were successfully contained by the harmonic fire weave, their shadowy forms gradually shrinking as the resonant energy disrupted their connection to the void. But the larger serpents, and especially the matriarch, proved more resilient. "We need to intensify the harmonic pattern," Ethan called to Varric. All 5 toned simultaneously on the matriarch. Varric relayed the command, and the dragons regrouped for a concentrated attack on the void matriarch. As they dove toward the massive creature, it seemed to sense their strategy. Multiple heads reared back, then shot forward, releasing not cold but a wave of anti-sound, a canceling frequency that disrupted the dragon's whistling techniques. Several dragons faltered, their harmonic flames sputtering out. One young female, caught mid-breath by the disruption, spun out of control and nearly collided with Varric before recovering. "It's countering our harmonics," Ethan realized with horror. "We need to change tactics." But before he could formulate a new approach, the matriarch struck. A massive tendril of void matter whipped through the air, catching 2 dragons with a glancing blow that froze one wing on each. They spiraled downward, barely managing controlled crashes that left them vulnerable on the ground. Drogath and his warriors moved to protect their fallen comrades, engaging the smaller serpents with coordinated bursts of harmonic fire. The technique was working, but too slowly, and the matriarch remained largely unaffected. "We need something stronger," Varric said, circling above the main battle. "Something the matriarch can't anticipate and counter." Ethan's mind raced, recalling the ancient text. "Singing with flame and burning with song," he murmured. Then it hit him. "Varric, the whistling is just the beginning. It's not just about different tones, it's about true harmony." "Music? What do you mean?" the prince asked, executing a sharp turn to avoid a cold tendril. "In human music, harmony isn't static. It progresses, it resolves, it tells a story," Ethan explained rapidly. "We've been treating each tone separately, but we need to weave them together in a true musical pattern." Understanding dawned in Varric's eyes. "Like a song." "Exactly. Can you relay to the others?" "They need to follow my lead. I'll conduct a simple melody, and each dragon needs to match their harmonic fire to the changing tones." Varric communicated the new plan through the crystal network. The dragons disengaged temporarily, regrouping around Ethan and Varric at a safer altitude. "Follow my hand movements," Ethan instructed. "When I signal up, raise your tone. When I signal down, lower it. Together, we'll create a moving harmony that the void serpents can't adapt to." It was a desperate gamble, but the dragons fell into formation, ready to try this new approach. Ethan took a deep breath, then began conducting a simple but powerful melody, one from his childhood, a folk song his grandfather had taught him alongside whistling. The dragons followed his cues, their harmonic fires shifting in pitch and intensity according to his gestures. Gradually, something magical happened. The individual flames began to merge and intertwine, creating a flowing river of harmonized fire that moved with the music. "Now," Ethan shouted, directly at the matriarch. The dragons dove in perfect formation, their synchronized harmonic fire streaming ahead of them like a living musical score made visible. The matriarch attempted to disrupt it with anti-sound, but the constantly changing harmonies proved impossible to counter. The weave of fire struck the massive void creature, enveloping it in a cocoon of resonant energy. The matriarch thrashed wildly, its multiple heads whipping in all directions. The surrounding landscape froze and cracked under the lashing of cold tendrils, but the harmonic fire held firm, constricting ever tighter around the creature's form. "Maintain the harmony," Ethan called, continuing to conduct even as Varric maneuvered through the increasingly hazardous airspace. "Don't break the pattern." For what seemed like an eternity, the battle hung in balance, dragons circling, maintaining their musical fire weave, the matriarch struggling against its constraints. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, the creature began to collapse inward, its connection to the void severed by the harmonic disruption. One by one, the remaining serpents suffered the same fate, unable to maintain their presence in this realm without the matriarch's power. As the last serpent dissipated, leaving only a rapidly thawing patch of ground, the dragons roared their victory to the night sky. The flight back to Mount Draconis was considerably slower than their outward journey. Many dragons bore injuries from cold tendrils or from the physical exertion of sustained harmonic fire breathing. Yet there was an atmosphere of triumph that overshadowed the pain and fatigue. Queen Azura and the full court awaited their return, the news of their victory having already reached the mountain through magical communication. As the battle-weary dragons landed on the great platform, they were met with a hero's welcome. "The void serpents are vanquished," Drogath reported formally to the queen, though his proud stance told the story more eloquently than words. Thanks to the harmonic fire and to human music, all eyes turned to Ethan, who suddenly felt very conspicuous as Varric helped him dismount on shaky legs. Queen Azura regarded him thoughtfully. "It seems we have underestimated human contributions once again. First whistling, now music, simple things that have turned the tide against an ancient enemy." "Not simple, Your Majesty," Ethan said, finding his voice. "Just different. Humans and dragons perceive the world in different ways. Together, we see more completely than either could alone." The queen nodded slowly. "Wisdom from unexpected sources, indeed. The alliance between our species was born of necessity and maintained through diplomacy, but perhaps now it can truly flourish through genuine exchange." In the days that followed, much changed in Mount Draconis. The training in harmonic fire continued, no longer as emergency battle preparation, but as a valued addition to draconic arts. Young dragons eagerly signed up for Ethan's classes, which now included not just whistling, but basic music theory. Varric, having distinguished himself in battle, took on new responsibilities as an ambassador of cultural exchange, working closely with Ethan to identify other areas where human and dragon perspectives might complement each other. "Have you ever considered," the prince asked one evening, as they watched the sunset from a high balcony, "that your life might have turned out very differently if you hadn't become a janitor here?" Ethan smiled. "I took the job because it was available and the pay was good. I never imagined I'd end up teaching dragons to whistle, let alone leading them in musical battle against interdimensional serpents." "Sometimes the most important journeys begin with the humblest steps," Varric observed. A janitor noticing a prince's problem. A human skill no one thought important. A different way of looking at something dragons had done the same way for millennia. "And now," Varric said, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset, "we have a chance to truly learn from each other. Not just humans serving dragons or dragons protecting humans, but genuine partnership." A month after the battle, a formal ceremony was held to honor those who had fought against the void serpents. Drogath and his warriors received medals of valor, as did the dragons of Mount Draconis who had mastered harmonic fire in time to join the fight. To Ethan's surprise, he too was called forward to stand before Queen Azura. The massive dragon queen lowered her head to address him directly. "Ethan Cole," she said, her voice carrying throughout the great hall. "You came to us as a janitor, became a teacher, and proved yourself a warrior and leader. There is no existing honor in our traditions that adequately recognizes your contribution." She raised her head, addressing the full court. "Therefore, we create a new title, Harmonizer of Dragons. May you be the first of many who help our species find new melodies together." A specially crafted medallion was placed around Ethan's neck, a spiral of precious metals that resembled both a musical note and a stylized flame. It was warm to the touch and seemed to hum faintly with an energy that resonated with something deep inside him. As the court erupted in approving roars and the human delegation applauded, Ethan caught Varric's eye. The dragon prince winked, a human gesture he had recently adopted, and sent a small, perfectly controlled spiral of harmonic fire into the air above Ethan's head, where it formed a briefly glowing crown before dissipating. In that moment, Ethan understood that his grandfather's simple whistling lessons had not just saved a dragon prince from embarrassment or defeated an ancient enemy. They had opened a door between two worlds that had been merely coexisting and helped them begin truly harmonizing. And that, he thought as the celebration continued around him, was a melody worth continuing for many years to come. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.